quite, like I say, it's quite eclectic music at that time. But then also, during that time, kind of the end of the 70s, that electronic feel started coming in. What was your take on that?
Creaky chair, yeah. So the electronic thing, yeah. I mean, it's that thing is really spans the whole of the decade, really, because I mean, I chose not. I was trained to be a viola player in an orchestra, and at the beginning of the 70s, I turned down a chance to go to the Royal Academy of Music, and I joined a jazz rock band orientated band. So I learned how to improvise, but in some ways, when the punk thing came along, I actually agreed with that. In fact, we preempted it quite a bit with the Ultravox thing, with vocal lines like "people like you should be put down," talking about hippies and just generally the lecturing sort of, because I suffered a little bit from that because I was slightly young for the hippie thing. So after a while, I got sick of being lectured to as regards improvisation. So we took that punk theme with us, But it slightly hindered us because it had, as you probably know, it had such a stranglehold on everything. And it actually caused Ultravox to eventually to not really get a proper say. So we're talking 77, 78 now, but we were going against the flow because we were just difficult bastards, really, and which I quite liked. So we were doing keyboard-orientated things right in the middle of the punk explosion, and going on stage and getting booed off but a lot of the time. But that's not necessarily really true because we did have quite a good live following. So we would do keyboard things, and I had a synthesizer as early as 1977, and we used to make up sparse, heavy drum tracks just from the synthesizer, take all the release off and everything, and we were quite knocked out just by the power of all this. Because, I mean, what was good about Ultravox was we would experiment, and that's what kept us all alive, really. It was, even though we knew that we weren't selling many records.
Sure. Tell people now, have all this equipment here, it's, near 1999. Electronic and synthesizers are just, day to day. But tell us a little bit about how difficult it was to get those things to work. Practically.
In those days.
In those days.
Yeah. Well, the first one I got, which was the ARP Odyssey. I mean, I just didn't bother learning how to play it. What I tended to do, used to put these white, paper things over that would slot onto the notches properly, and it'd tell you where to move these switches and all that, and these sliders. And I mean, that was interesting. And it helped me. It seemed more complicated than what it actually was. I mean, I'd go and do these gigs and think, oh, are all the switches in the right place? And it was like, oh, God. And we used to finish, I can give you an example of them not being in the right place. We used to finish one track off. We used to do a violin solo, on a Fender violin, very distorted. And then we used to finish it off with a sound where you get it so it comes in right at the top and goes right down through the bottom, and people would be just like, shit, literally. And I had just one switch in the wrong position, and instead of it doing like that, it ended up doing what's called a sample and hold thing and made a sound, because I was using white noise. So it would go ding, 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 ding. So it did this silly musical thing, I mean, that's how... they could really make you look an absolute fool as well, So instead of everybody going, wow, they'd just piss themselves laughing. I mean, basically what I did, because I'm like a violin player, and the climate really influenced what we did, you were pushed around by the audience quite a bit. You're talking about a time when people were gobbing on you and generally having a swing at you, especially the keyboard player. No, it's true. I mean, it's hard to go back to that time. So what I tended to do was make a violin sound, bring it right down and simplify it. So I had two sounds. I had a sound which was a soft sound, like the middle section of Vienna later, so all nice and soft. Or I used to have one which was just a pierce and cut through, and with vibrato on. And I think that came out of really just wanting to be heard, It was like, You know, quite often I'd see bands and the keyboard, if they weren't playing like a Vox organ or something, like some of the bands at that time, like the Rugulator, which I thought were really good, you just wouldn't hear the keyboard player, so it was a bit of a deliberate intention of me to be heard.
Yeah,
You know,
sure.
and that eventually became the 80s Ultravox's sort of lead sound, you know. But it came really, I suppose, from being a violin player and a desire to cut through. But just to answer your question, you know, those things were precarious in those days. But I mean, they are now, really, to a certain extent, you know.
How did Brian Eno get involved in the first, the Ultravox sound?
Well, we signed to Ireland, this is back in 1976, and well, we really rated him. We liked Another Green World, and we were into Roxy Music with him in it. No, we were into Roxy Music, and that's how he came along, you know. He was, I think he was on Ireland himself.